Ah, right, there, I'm on. Fantastic. Okay, hello and welcome to our Phoenix Point panel. Okay, I'm Alan Stroud, lead writer for Phoenix Point. This is Kevin Hill, and he is the community manager for Snapshot Games. And you may remember we sat here about a year ago. Weird, isn't it? It was that long.
I'm around again, yeah.
Yeah. Was anyone here last year when we sat there? Awesome, right? Okay. So what we're going to try and do today is give you a bit of an update, talk to you about a few things that we've been up to. Has anyone played the backer build demo that's outside the Artemis rooms? Okay, one person at the back, one person over here. So if you haven't, do head up to the Artemis rooms. We've laid on a PC for you to play the build that's here. We're going to be streaming that build. I think Kev's got it on his screen, so we'll be showing you that as we're talking through a few things and going through stuff. Now, what my plan is, and I have the clearance from Julian in that I specifically asked what can I talk about and what can't I talk about. I've been told I could talk about anything I'm working on, which is awesome because there's loads I can tell you. So the plan is that we're going to kind of pitch this at a level for people who know nothing about the game, and then we're going to pitch it at a level for people who know a little bit or backed it, and then we're going to pitch it at a level for people who've been following it quite a lot. So just to give you a bit of a sense of each point of sort of knowledge, as it were, because we're very conscious that there are some of the fans on Discord who are going to probably tune into the Twitch, and obviously there are some key fans here and everything else who will know certain things. So I don't want to make this a too detailed a presentation for people that don't know anything about the game, and at the same time I don't want to make it too repetitive for anyone that does know stuff about what's going on. So we're going to go through and we'll talk through that. So if you don't know about Phoenix Point is Snapshot Games' new turn-based tactical shooter that draws inspiration from XCOM, draws inspiration from the classic XCOM, because obviously Julian worked and made the classic XCOM, but also draws a little bit of inspiration from the new XCOM as well in terms of its look and feel and some of the elements that are there. It's a bit of a fusion, really, isn't it, Kev?
Yeah, it's synergy of the two, really.
Okay, so what we'll have is we'll have the demo up, as I say, for you to look at. When we produce the demo, and sometimes demos are a bit old school. Certainly some people when we were looking at the production said, "Oh, we're doing a demo. That's aren't we doing early access or this?" And actually we did a demo. What the demo allows you to do is to play through a level in the game using one of the factions, which is an NPC faction. So you get to play characters who are NPCs in the game, or will be NPCs in the game later, based on what happens to them in the demo. Now, the production of that, to start with, was very much about the game element, but was also then about me as a writer and Jonas Karatzis, my colleague who is co-lead writer. It was about the two of us being able to put a sort of narrative into this piece as well. So working with the team in Bulgaria, they were producing much of the visuals, and we were sort of adding a story. And that's really what we've been doing throughout. We've been developing a world, and this kind of pulls on from my Elite Dangerous work in that I did some work with Elite Dangerous, kind of developing its backstory, developing its campaign, developing its history, and that worked very well for my doctorate and for the game as it is. And then gradually, I sort of refined those techniques through the other games that I worked on. And Phoenix Point is pretty much the culmination of that. So the brief I was given was to think about a post-apocalyptic setting with lots of Lovecraftian themes. So hence Phoenix Point is quite gritty, it's quite sort of horror-based, there's sort of a menacing quality to it. And there is this element of the story being quite big and provoking questions. So, you know, that is something we're doing as we're developing it. You play as the faction, the Phoenix Project. The Phoenix Project were founded originally in one iteration. They were founded many, many hundreds of years ago to defend against some kind of alien threat. And they collapsed, and then they were refounded, and they collapsed, and they were refounded, and essentially were born out of kind of conspiracy theories and sort of other different myths in each generation that they were refounded. This current iteration of the Phoenix Project, known as the Phoenix Project, whereas previous iterations were the Phoenix Committee and you know, previous names to them. This current iteration was founded by the United Nations in the 1950s and was connected with the SETI program and was connected with other programs at the time, sort of covert and also overt programs. And so with the fact that we're setting in the real world, it means that you can kind of connect our fiction into sort of real world history. So you can think a little bit of the X-Files and Area 51 and stuff. And Phoenix Point, the game, is set in 2047. So what's happened is that from today, in a couple of years' time, guess what? There's going to be a third world war. Sorry. And the world's going to collapse because some awful alien virus is going to come out of the sea and turn everybody into crabmen. Okay? And other varieties of crustacean, should you prefer to be something else. But this virus comes out of the sea, and initially when it's in a fog, so initially when people become infected, things happen to them, they start to transform, or they literally walk into the sea and are never heard from again. And then years later, some of them come back and they look very different because they've effectively merged with different species, different organisms that are living out in the water. Gradually, this process, starting the Third World War, starting in the 2030s, gradually this process effectively wipes out humanity, and what's left are a remnant of different outposts and settlements that are attempting to fight off this alien incursion that has infected all of the world's biomass. It is in the plants, it's in the water, it's in the animals, it's in the people, and preserving yourself and staying uninfected is actually very difficult. But there are three non-player factions. One of the non-player factions are the New Jericho faction, who Kev is currently demonstrating. These four individuals are all infected soldiers from New Jericho. So basically they were told, and this is the premise of the demo, they were told, sorry lads and lady, you're all infected, get out there and fight the aliens while we run away, and if we see you again, we'll shoot you. So not a very nice kind of end for Richter and Irina and Isaiah and Daniel.
The odds were definitely against them.
So essentially these four are left out there, and this mission is to basically for them to retake the base and to send a distress call from one of the towers, and also to get some updated tactical data on how many enemies are coming to attack Fort Freiheit, which is their old base. And there is a backstory to each of these characters. This is what, as a writing team, we've been doing. We've been producing short ebooks of short stories of people who have been living in the Phoenix Point world. Some of them were living in the 2020s. Some of them were living now, you know, and some of them living in the 2030s and so on. So you get a little bit of stuff going on about each character coming from lots of different angles. Some of the stories are written historically, so you have one or two who are written in the 1930s. You've got some stories written in the 1990s. One poor girl who her grandfather dies and she has to go and pack up his house, and he has all these strange shells in his house. And then she sees him out in the water, swimming around. Apparently he's not dead, he's alive, he just lives in the water now. So, you know, quite a lot of different ideas sort of packed into there to sort of bring the depth of what we're looking to do. The premise of the game is that as the Phoenix Project, you start off with one basically wrecked base, and you have to rebuild the Phoenix Project, and you have to make deals with the 3 non-player factions to try to decide how to defeat the virus and to defeat the virus. So you have to make use of their resources. The problem is with those 3 factions is they are very, very anti each other, and they are also kind of good and bad depending on your outlook. So for New Jericho are essentially a militaristic faction, as you can see. Currently demoing them. They are very much believers that we can beat the alien if we can shoot them enough. Which think that the parasite, the infection is in all the plants, it's in everything else, might not be the perfect solution to solving the crisis. You have that. You then have Synedrian, who are much more of a sort of intellectual faction. They're thinking about trying to out-science the virus, and they have a variety of solutions associated with scientific sort of processes. We're currently releasing the stories on the Synedrian faction this coming week. I'm waiting on one piece of writing from my co-lead writer. As soon as he finishes it, then we'll have a set of stories out for people. These are free, so we regularly share these with the newsletter so that people can get a sense of the game world. And the Synedrian faction, they're quite interesting in that they are, as I say, they're quite sort of intellectual. They're a lot of scientists in their settlements, but they also have artificial intelligences who act as characters within their settlements. So essentially, they treat AI intelligences as the same as the humans who live within their settlements. So it's quite interesting to see that sort of interaction between artificial intelligence and humanity within their faction, which is something we've not told anyone before. So. And then we have the third faction is the Disciples of Anu. The Disciples of Anu they're actually more religious, and they've basically developed a religion out of thinking about the virus and thinking about ancient history. And they've taken some of the clues and the papers that were written by previous iterations of the Phoenix Project, and they've developed effectively a religion that they're following, which they believe is going to save the world. Now, they basically accept that they are infected. The Disciples of Anu accept that humans are going to have to change and transform, and so infection is part of that change and transformation. But they have found ways in which they can control that change. So they basically make use of those, and they worship the Exalted, who is the leader of their cult, essentially. So initially, when some of the players looked at the Disciples of Anu, they sort of saw them as effectively monsters and as the enemy, but they're not the enemy. They very much do have their own take on trying to save the world, but it means we all have to take a bit of crab and change a little bit in terms of the way in which we are, rather than just carry on. They're not trying to return the world to what it was. I'd say probably New Jericho are the faction that are trying to return the world to what it was. But yeah, so that gives you a bit of context. So as a player, you'll start with this base, and you're going to have to make deals with these 3 different factions to move things forward. So you can probably see that there is a certain level of comparison to XCOM, but the difference here is, of course, is that there isn't a world to save in the same way. There's not an external menace. The menace is already here, and you're effectively picking up the fragments to try and start again in terms of being able to actually save the Earth and save humanity. So those are the bits and pieces of that. Now, so I'm going to go on to just talk a little bit about the demo, and Kev will probably be able to sort of help with this. So in terms of what's there, what would you say are the ways in which people have found the demo experience different to what they've known before?
A lot of people that have played Phoenix Point for the first time are used to playing the Firaxis XCOM game. And one thing that those games have is a very simplistic board game style mechanic where you essentially have two actions. You can move and fire, or fire and move, or move twice. It's a very minimal number of choices, but with big consequences. In Phoenix Point, it's more like the original XCOM, where you can actually have a far greater range of choices you can make throughout the mission. So you can take a soldier, for example, and you're not limited to just moving a single space at a time, or in 2 turns. You can actually just edge forwards 1 space at a time if you want to, and fire, move after firing. It just gives you a lot more tactical freedom.
Yeah, and also there's a difference with the aiming, isn't there?
Yeah, certainly. So one of the main things with the aiming is we have the free aim system. So I've just taken an aim at this particular alien that I can see here. If I hit the fire button, it aims automatically, but then I can actually fine-tune it if I want to. Pinpoint where I want the shot to actually land. So there's only a 50% chance that the shot will land within the yellow circle, but it will definitely land somewhere within the red circle. It might hit cover though. And as all of these aliens have different body parts, and those different parts have different levels of armor, so this crabman, for example, his carapace has 3 armor, which is not something I want to hit. If I can hit him in the head or in the torso, I'm more likely to do damage. So I've got the option to try and fine-tune where that shot lands.
And each of the shots are kind of calculated differently, aren't they, compared to other games?
Yeah, it's the way the ballistic system works in Phoenix Point is it's actually physically rendered. So in the Firaxis XCOM games, it's whether you hit or miss is based on a series of calculations comparing your aim statistics to the enemy's defense statistics, and that just gives you a percentage to hit. In Phoenix Point, the bullets are actually fired and simulated from the gun to the target, and even if they miss, they can still damage whatever they hit. So it could be another part of the same enemy you're aiming for, it could be the terrain, cover, another enemy, even one of your own soldiers if they get in the way.
So the friendly fire aspect is also is quite important here, because another thing that's within this game is, and we talked a little bit about this last year, is the will point system. Quite a lot of activities that the characters are engaged in when they're trying to do special actions or they're trying to sort of push a bit harder, they make use of a will point statistic, and they have a number of will points saved up. So what you can't do is continually do the kind of Overwatch tactics, because actually the Overwatch tactics make use of your limited will points. And will points are also used as a statistic for the enemy to try and scare you, or to try and affect your morale. Essentially, as you play through a scenario, so rather than having a time-limited scenario, as you play through a scenario, you become more mentally exhausted, and by becoming more mentally exhausted, you're more susceptible to particular attacks and particular things that can happen to you. So will points are a great resource, and you also can gain them. So if something happens, like you take the tower, I think in this scenario, if you take the tower, it's an achievement. As soon as you make an achievement, you kind of get a bit of a sort of a sense of euphoria, a sense that your characters achieved something. So will points are gained, but at the same time, they then get used up based on the actions you're doing or based on effects that are there. When your will points are low, things like the mist, which I mentioned earlier, which we talked about, that co-opted people and took them into the sea. If the aliens decide to deploy the mist, then the characters who are lower in will points will be more susceptible to, unfortunately, being lost from your control and wandering off or turning round, giving you a problem because they're going to shoot at your soldiers. Similarly, you've got to always bear in mind this issue of infection. If your soldiers get infected, then you have facilities that you can kind of work on in relation to what's there. Remember, there's no cure, so you've then got to manage the situation. So if you're choosing to keep soldiers who've got an affliction or something's going wrong with them, and then they start to turn, the other soldiers are in trouble. So you've got to think about that all the way through the game in terms of the way in which these things are going to work. So in terms of what we have here, in the demo, you can also see one of the differences between this and previous games is, or different games, is that we don't have a pod system. We don't have a point of, what's the D? Pod. Position of deployment, or well, essentially, sometimes you'll find in a turn-based game, characters will walk through and then they'll trigger an enemy. So the enemy will only start to respond when you reach a particular section. That's not happening in this level. What's happening is that all of the enemies are generated and then start to act. So what that does is that creates a very different tactical situation for you, because you can't kind of meta the pod system. You can't direct all your troops in one direction and just trigger this guy, get rid of him, and then go the other way and trigger that guy. Essentially, as soon as the scenario is deployed, everything's moving. So so they're going to move and they're going to try and converge on you and come in from different angles. So it does make a very different play experience. It does mean you spend a bit more time spreading out and trying to cover perimeter and fields of fire in terms of what you're doing. So that makes things certainly interesting as a difference. You can probably see as well the different characters we've got here are of different classes. So at the moment in this demo, you've got 2 assault, 1 heavy, and a sniper. Yeah, so what will come is the medical class is nearly finished, or technician class rather, it's nearly finished. That was due to be in the demo, but wasn't quite ready, but we're working on that at the moment. And then there are a variety of other classes, so they do have sort of class specialisms. But the classes aren't as clearly fixed as you might see in other games. So you can still essentially improve characters through their experience in a way that is not representative just of the class. So you might find that there are particular abilities that you want to add to your character that are fairly generic or are gained through different things other than what their specialism is. In addition to that, we've done our best to combat the issue of I need a squad of 5, I need my 5 best men, okay, I'm going to take 5 rear admirals or 4-star generals out into a fight. The ranking system is done slightly differently in Phoenix Point, or it will be done slightly differently, so that essentially you need to be thinking all the time about managing the troops that you've got. You can deploy in a scenario up to 16.
Will be the maximum in certain conditions, yeah.
So in certain scenarios, you'll be able to deploy up to 16 soldiers. And with the fact that you need to be thinking about where these different attacks are coming from, you need to manage different squads to be able to respond. So what will probably be happening is you might have one squad who are quite experienced, but then you might want to take a guy out of that squad so that he can lead a second squad, so that his experience is there to make sure that that squad has got somebody who's a effective leader. What you don't want to do is end up in a situation where you've got one amazing squad and then a base is attacked and they can't get there, and all you've got is 4 recruits. Sucks to be you. Those guys are going to struggle. So you do need to think about your roster all the time in terms of that kind of management. So yeah, okay. Was there anything else that you thought we should cover on the demo before I start moving into things we're working on?
Not really. I mean, the demo at the moment is still a very early prototype. It is a pre-alpha build, so there isn't any of the strategic element of the game which a lot of people are waiting for. So like the geoscape, which is something we're hoping to get for future versions. But we will keep upgrading and updating this backer build. So for anyone that has backed the game or pre-ordered the game at a tier that includes the backer build access, it is an evolving build. Every couple of months we're adding more content, we're fixing bugs, sort of shaking it down as we go right up until the day we release.
So currently what's being worked on is the next iteration of this backer build, which we're hoping to have out in the next sort of little while. And that will add different facilities. If anybody remembers when Elite Dangerous did its alpha test, essentially there were 4 scenarios to start with, and then extra stuff was added on That's essentially a similar process to what we're working through. The other thing I think I would say is that in this build, and if anybody's going to go up to the machine outside the Artemis room, in this build, you've got the Fort Freiheit scenario, so you can basically play what I think what you're playing now, isn't it, Fort Freiheit?
This is one of the procedurally generated maps.
Right, that was what I was coming to.
Scenario,
yeah, so you've got the Fort Freiheit scenario, but you've then got a procedurally generated scenario builder. So what it will do is it will take the assets that are in the demo and create a different level. And that different level actually has more creatures, I think, doesn't it? It's got grenadiers and what have you.
Yeah, there are a few different types of enemies, and they're also procedurally spawned, so you'll get different enemy types in different quantities on the map on every playthrough.
And what happens with that too is that you're going to notice quite early on, and it's good that you're in this screen, you're going to notice early on that you run out of ammunition quite quickly. Hey, this is a post-apocalyptic world, right? They don't have as many places to go and make bullets for you. So you are going to find your characters will run out of ammunition. So being that they are procedurally generated scenarios, they will generate some weapons caches that you can go to, and you can find some additional weapons that you may have to use to complete the scenario. So when you run out of ammunition and are kind of wandering around with your useless guns, do think that actually there might be something around. But of course, being procedurally generated could be anything. So you might open up one box and it's empty. You might open up another box and there's 3 grenades. That's what you got to work with, you know. So it's going to be interesting to sort of see how that spans out in terms of what's there. We've not seen the Queen yet, have we?
No, she hasn't turned up yet, which is unusual. She's usually here by now.
Okay, so the other thing you're going to notice that's a bit different with this is that some of the assets that we have, if you just stay there for a sec, some of the assets that we have are a little bit bigger. You know, occasionally you do get slightly larger creatures, but some of the assets are a little bit bigger. The Queen is going to show up in a minute. This particular vehicle here, that's the Armadillo. Tell me if I'm wrong. I'm not wrong.
No, it is, yeah.
Okay, so that's the Armadillo. That will be a deployable unit in the game. So you've got light armored trucks that you can use as one of your 16, and you'll be able to use that and sort of take your troops and move them around the map, or deploy your troops out and use it as fire support. So at the moment it doesn't work in the scenario, but you will be able to make use of those later on in the game. Cool. Okay, so we shall look out for the Crab Queen. So I'll talk a little bit now about stuff that we're working on. Okay, so this gives you a bit of a sense of some of the things. There she is. Look at that, right on time. See, there we go. Right. Now, she's pretty nasty, but unfortunately, because at the moment, I'm not going to give this away completely, but because at the moment we've only implemented some of her abilities, that means that there are a couple of quick ways to get rid of her. So I'll let you work out which those are. But later on, she's going to have more attacks and a little bit more punch.
Yeah, probably definitely. And like the rest of the enemies, she will evolve as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things that we should talk about. So the crabs, the virus, essentially is continually evolving. So there are a series of mutations and different abilities that the virus can place on its troopers. So what will happen is that as you play through the game, the virus will continue to evolve, and as particular types of troopers are effective against you, those types of troopers will be deployed more against you. So the virus is using lots of different variations of its roster effectively to fight against you, and so it doesn't mean that the tactics that have worked this time are going to work exactly the same the next time. These guys are going to change and they're going to alter as things go through. Additionally to that, the roster system for your characters is going to be a little bit different. The one thing I've noticed about this type of game is that players get very attached to their characters. So, you know, we all quite like the ability to have 4 or 5 soldiers, and then let's customize them. Let's call them all my mates, or let's give them names of all the people who live down my street, Or let's give them the names of all the people I don't like and send them into terrible battles so that they all die. But people do like to customize their characters, and they do get a sense of ownership of their characters, which is great. What we want to also do to supplement that is to connect these characters very directly to the story. And we're finding ways at the moment to effectively make use of the of sort of database systems and interactive narrative to try to make the characters have a fit into what's going on. So when you generate your characters initially, they should come from a variety of different walks of life, because let's face it, you don't get much choice when you're in a post-apocalyptic society. You just train the guys who can handle stuff with guns, no matter where they've come from, and they may have a bit of a background, or they might be young, or they might be old, and that's when they come to you. So that's going to mean that a few of these characters are going to have some shady pasts and some secrets, and maybe turn up with some baggage. And what we want to be able to do is, rather than just have that kind of soldier background as window dressing, we want that background to affect the story of the game. So if you've got a soldier who it says on his background that he doesn't sleep very much, and when he does, people can hear him screaming, then later on, if he gets into a battle situation where he gets traumatized, that problem might become worse for you, and you may have to manage his condition to ensure that you get the best out of him. Or he might suddenly have a problem in the base, in which case you're going to have to respond to that and deal with it. Similarly, if you've got someone who is particularly... oh dear, oops, oh well. If you've got somebody who is a particularly good leader, then that particularly good leader might have an arc where they get better as a leader, but they also get a little bit arrogant, and so you then have to deal with them because they think they know better, and so on. You can kind of see ways in which we're trying to make the roster really affect the story of the game, and make you have to sort of think about your characters in what's there. In terms of developing that, at the moment I'm working on that, so hence I'm allowed to talk about it. We have currently modelled out 230 odd countries, so your character will come from one of these places, and I've then started to work through little individual backgrounds for those characters, so that essentially you'll get quite a lot of backgrounds that are pulled together from these different columns. What you will probably find is that every person who plays will have one character who has a particular background. So you might all end up with a soldier who has a deep, dark secret. But for some of you, that will be Jane. For some of you, that will be Tim. For some of you, that will be Pierre. And some of you, that will be Boris. And for some of you, that will be Katerina. So essentially, it will hopefully individualize, and they will be slightly different. What you won't have is the same kind of, much as they'll all have a deep, dark secret, it will kind of, the narrative will switch and emerge slightly differently in terms of how that deploys out. Yeah, you see, she's quite scary. Up close, quite scary. I do worry.
I think the situation might be hopeless here.
Oh dear. You're gonna die.
There's one of the other features that Phoenix Point has, which we didn't mention, is that your equipment also has armor and hit points, and you can get your weapons destroyed.
Oh dear, what did you lose?
My sniper rifle, my pistol, my med kit, my heavy machine gun.
It's almost like that was fate. Oh no, what do I do? So hand slap damage is not really doing it for you.
I think Stoller's had it.
Okay, does he know Kung Fu?
Both his arms and his head's disabled.
Okay, so yeah, just a flesh wound, right?
Pretty grievous flesh wound.
Okay. Only me that gets Monty Python around here. Okay. So essentially, you can see that we're sort of trying to layer the narrative. The narrative is going to be very important. Did any of you play Frontier First Encounters? Hands up who played Frontier First Encounters. Okay, right. Do you remember how the story seemed to occur around you in terms of the way in which essentially what was going on with the newspapers is they were basically using key codes to ensure that the events were happening around you. Has anybody seen the Dreamware website scrape of that HTML? Have you seen it? No one's seen it? Okay. When I worked on Elite Dangerous, one of the things I had to do is go through all of those newspaper articles. And what was interesting is because a fantastic guy who preserved that website, who preserved that data, he basically turned it into a complete list of HTML pages, and they're brilliant. They're a really good resource. So what I did is I went through them all, and I just went through to make sure I had all the Elite Dangerous lore correct. But I also was able to look at the way in which they managed to continually connect the information to your playing experience. And what was going on is that the system was analyzing where you were in the galaxy, and then it was making all the articles pick up locations around where you were. So it was doing it by a database, checking that up. And it was also registering your commander name, and it was connecting that into this database. It was a very, very clever sort of way of sort of making you feel the galaxy was massive, but actually ensuring that this minimal amount of text, not minimal as in small, but less text than writing everything for the whole galaxy, was revolving around you. And it's the one experience that you can't really get in Elite Dangerous anymore because of the fact that being an MMO, it can't essentially create a hero story around you. However, it was a cool system. So it is one of the inspirations behind how we are working on these engines. I am looking, at that system, and it is a system that I thought was incredible in terms of building narratives that feel like they are absolutely intrinsic to your story experience. And being that this is a single player game, it allows us that opportunity to be able to do that. The one difficulty, language. It needs, whatever I write has to be completely translatable without issues over how gender is represented in that language, which we talked about 2-3 months ago, didn't we?
Yeah.
So essentially I came up with my first draft and I went, this is amazing, look at this. I've created a character background, it's 200 words that has been taken from 12 different database spreadsheets, and look, you get a sentence from there and a sentence from there and a sentence from there, and look, it does this. And it works really well in English. And then in French, with the different clauses for male and female in relation to verbs, in relation to other words that are not the same as in English. Exactly, we did, okay? The point being is we sat there and went, this just isn't going to work. We've got to find a way of making it work. And actually we have. We found a system which is cleaner. It's not perfect, but it's cleaner because little tiny thing that works is instead of doing a report on this character, having someone tell you who this character is, what they're about, you get the characters to speak for themselves, and they say, I am this, I am that, I am the other. Actually, it removes a lot of that gender issue in the language. Not perfect, but much closer, and actually much easier for us to then work off in terms of a translation model. So you can see that, actually we're sort of thinking about it, and I was gutted until, when I put that first thing up and I went, this is amazing, it works really well. And, God, a whole idea dead. No, actually, if we do this, okay, that might work. So that's essentially what we're setting to. And it will mean as well that when the characters, we're trying to find ways at the moment for the characters to, oh dear, yeah, that's a real problem. Yeah, that's pretty terrible. Okay, please do better than Kev, right? Okay, the machine's up there.
Gave them an impossible task, and they did what they could.
In my defense, I'm still a little bit delicate after last night.
Fair, okay. Just, in terms of the connection as well, it's worth making the point. All the audio that's done on this demo Most of the audio, half the audio, 3/4 of the audio.
A portion of the audio.
A portion of the audio that's done on this demo. Certainly those speeches that are at the end and at the beginning were done by the Radio Theatre Workshop. So Chris Jarvis did them. Well, it's not his voice, it's someone else's voice. But yeah, so you can kind of see the connection in terms of, as soon as we find something that needs doing, we occasionally go to people we know can do it and are good at it. So yeah, it was nice to be able to, to get Chris in to work on some stuff on this too. But yeah, so having sort of put together these ideas for the soldiers, we're then trying to expand the narrative. We're looking at the way in which we can sort of pick stuff up from the main narrative of solving the plot. If you want to know more about the plot, you can read the backstories. Nothing in terms of what we're publishing, because we're doing an awful lot of short stories at the moment. Nothing in terms of what we're publishing requires to be read. And we're not doing lots and lots of text in the game. But we are looking at ways in which we can display as much flavour as possible. So things like having soldiers comment on something. If you remember your XCOM mission screen, it might come out with, we're going to Russia for this one, or we're going to Norway for this one. And it will give you this sort of screen of the mission briefing. And we're kind of looking at ways in which we can add a little comment from an individual soldier so that you can get a bit more of a flavour of who they are. Has anyone played FTL? Okay, a couple of nods, okay. So you know as well that with FTL you've got screens that sort of flash up with commentary in terms of what's there. We don't want to get into the idea of this interface being sort of too crowded. I don't want you to have to click off, comments from different people all over the place, because I think that's kind of going to get in your way. But we do want to find subtle ways to give you more of a sense of character to the people that that you care about, your soldiers. I mean, Kev clearly didn't care about Daniel Stoller because he let him die. But I'm anticipating that you'll care about your.
He was infected anyway.
Yeah, it's true. He was infected. That's fine. So yeah, so you can get a bit of a sense in terms of those things. The main narrative, as I say, is to solve the infection. To heal the world. And sort of pick it up from the virus, and that'll involve you going all across the world, finding different locations, finding different clues. Like I said, some of those are in, there are hints of some of those in the stories we've already produced, but certainly it's a big mythology. We were inspired by Lovecraft in terms of doing this, so we're very much trying to create this kind of mysterious mythology in terms of what we do. And yeah, I kind of quite like it. One of the highlights for me is sitting on Discord and seeing some of the existing backers speculate on what things mean. And of course, for me, the win is not whether they're right or wrong. The win is that they're talking about what these things mean. So, it is very, very useful to sort of see that. And occasionally they come up with a great idea, and so we nick that, and but we don't tell them because we came up with it first, obviously. But yeah, no, having that kind of responsiveness with people who are interested in the game, I think is really important in terms of what's there. Okay, so have you started again?
I have.
Okay, all right. So let's have a quick look at. Because I put up a little Reddit thread, I would just want to quickly check to see if anything has come up on there. Okay, right. So questions from there, and then what we'll try and do is take questions from here if we can do as well. If there's anything anyone wants to ask us. Will hot pink camo for soldiers be a thing? Says Cannonite.
I hope not.
Okay.
There will be customization in the game for your soldiers. We haven't completely decided on what the exact level and scope of that's going to be. My personal view is I'd like things to be a little bit more realistic and not be too wild and out there, because we are trying to sort of build a world, and we do want some colour, but then we've got this post-apocalyptic. And I think people running around in electric pink hot pants and a neon green fedora doesn't really fit.
I think you're missing a point here. And that's not a defense of hot pink camo, okay? But there is an implied point in terms of what he said. Hot pink would be one thing. will there be the option of hot pink clothing? Okay, yeah, probably. I think most people probably wouldn't necessarily want that. Not sure. Hot pink camo. Okay, hot pink camo implies that there is an environment that is hot pink, because it would be camouflage.
I think we should steal that.
That's not a bad idea, is it? Okay, hot pink scenario. That could be a band. Hot pink scenario. Yeah.
Let's go with that.
I'd be on guitar. Do drums. Yeah. So we've that joke only goes so far. So we've essentially got a fair amount of customization options in that regard. So it will. We'll give people a sort of an option for what they want to do. I think as well, the customization, it's worth pointing out that some of the customization, I'm having to think carefully about how that impacts on that coupled narrative system. Because if I give you, and I want to do that, but if I give you the option of writing your own background, that connected narrative of the soldier with the deep dark secret or something like that won't fit. So the system has to recognize, if that's going to work, what has to happen is the system has to recognize that you have decoupled the character from that narrative thread. And if that happens, that's perfectly fine, because your characters could then be picked up by other narrative threads. But I've got to make sure that kind of back-end work is done. Otherwise, you get a character who you've said, is my best mate, and he grew up next door, and he's really nice, and he has no issues in his life in terms of deep dark secrets whatsoever. And then suddenly, he has a deep dark secret, what's going on? So it's an immersion breaker in terms of it contradicting itself. So we want to make sure that sort of fits together in terms of what's being done. So the customization options need to sort of fit in relation to what's there. Okay, quick question. Do you know how recruiting soldiers will work in game? Like I know other factions can give you soldiers if you have good relations, can you also find them from independent havens or maybe rescue missions, like bailing neutral scavengers out or out of trouble or something?
I don't know all the answers to that. There will be multiple ways to recruit soldiers, both through the legitimate means and espionage and things like that. There will be certain mission types available, and one of the things that Julian's very big on doing is having missions that are open-ended, where you don't necessarily have to go into a mission and complete a specific objective. So you might, for example, be friendly with New Jericho, and New Jericho are being attacked by the aliens, and you're sent to go and help New Jericho out. But you might see there's some technology that they've got lying around unattended, and you may just decide you want to take that and run off and leave them to fight the aliens themselves.
Yeah, so all of your interactions with those factions will change them. It will alter the way in which they perceive, the way in which they talk to you. It can even destroy them, because the three factions are essentially multi-layered. They have different competing agendas within them. So if you start to help the disciples of Anu, and there is a particular person in the disciples of Anu whose agenda you are supporting, who is asking you to do stuff in missions, then that agenda will begin to become more popular in the disciples faction. So that can cause the faction to change, might even cause a conflict. Similarly to Synedrian. Synedrian have a lot of scientific solutions towards what's going to best solve the crisis. And if you start supporting one particular solution, then you're going to be tipping their faction towards that solution in terms of what's there. So they are quite layered in the way in which they work. To return to the question in terms of recruitment, there's also we're looking at ways in which, what you were saying, we're looking at ways in which you can see the existing accepted way in which people think these missions work, think this stuff works, and then you can kind of pick it apart. So with alpha and beta missions, we were talking about the other week, which is where, your alpha mission is you send your guys in or you send your troops in and they drop in and they do the job and then they leave. Now in other games, they would leave and they'd leave with this pot of booty, which is all the things that they picked up, which might be corpses, might be weapons, might be stuff that was left lying around. what about instead if we do the alpha mission? They go in, they do their stuff, and then you have to keep a beta squad on standby, because the beta squad will go in with the scientists and do the pickup. And most of the time, that does nothing. It's nice and automatic and it's fine. Sometimes more aliens turn up. So your beta squad ends up in a mission and you have to do the cleanup, but also get the scientists out. So it becomes more of a sort of escort and rescue. And suddenly we have one event that's triggered 2 different missions rather than one event that's triggered 1 mission and is just rinse and repeat. So we're kind of thinking of ways in which we can get more tactical battle and more variety of the tactical battle into what you're attempting to achieve. And that also, by doing that, immediately you're into roster management because your alpha team will not be available. So you need to make sure you have a good cleanup squad who are available to manage the second bit. It's also worth mentioning we've talked about the fact that there will be 3-way battles, haven't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Really, because there will be either multiple factions involved or one faction plus the Phoenix Project and the aliens.
Yeah, exactly. So you may well find you're in a situation where you're fighting one of the factions and you're fighting the virus, or you're fighting the virus with that faction, and then that faction betrays you halfway through, or you betray that faction halfway through, and so on and so forth. Or you stay loyal to that faction, but one of your soldiers becomes infected and he betrays all of you, and then that faction turns on you, and so on. So you can see the sort of complications that we're bringing together. Okay. Fine. We're currently we're at just past 12, so I don't want to run on too much longer, but we'll just have a quick look here, and then I'll open it up to questions to the floor. There we go. Right, okay, we're clear there. So I'm just going to step to the mic, and I'll bring the mic to people. Has anybody got a question to ask? Great, I'll come straight to you.
Thanks. So my first question, how about modding? Are you considering allowing the game to be modded?
There will be modding support. We've said from the beginning when we did the FIG campaign that we wanted the game to be moddable. It won't be moddable on launch, but we're building it with that in mind to add it further on down the line.
Thank you. And just one more, how much of micromanagement there is with the inventory system compared to, say, original XCOM?
At the moment, the inventory system is still being worked on, particularly with the user interface. We are still working out the fine-tuning of how it's going to look in terms of, is it going to be like item Tetris like it was in the original XCOM? There will be a number of different items, weapons, ammunition types, and just like the original XCOM, you'll be able to assign equipment to your soldiers before you go on a mission. You'll be able to loot it from crates and deposits on the battlefield, as well as picking it up from fallen comrades and enemies as well.
Excellent, thank you.
No worries. Any other questions? Sure? Okay. Okay, good.
Will there be any sort of player choice within the mission? So you'd have to make a choice within the mission which would change the outcome of a mission or how the mission goes?
I don't think there's going to be anything in terms of a choice that you have to make that's presented to you, but certainly how you complete the mission can change the outcome. So, as Alan was saying, you might have a mission that has a very specific objective, but you might be able to complete that mission in a different way, and it doesn't count as a loss. It'll still be a win, but
Thanks.
Yeah, that specific thing, right, on loss. So one of the aspirations we have is that I'm very, very conscious that games at the moment are all about winning, are all about take a scenario like the scenario we're playing through, win the scenario, and that advances the plot. What we want to do is to ensure that actually if you lose a scenario or two, that also advances the plot, just advances it in a different way. I don't want to basically sit here and say, hey, lose all the scenarios and you'll still get a story and it'll still play through and you can still win the day because, you can't lose. That would be weird. Okay, the world will end. Okay, if you're completely crap at four-man tactical battles in a turn-based scenario, yeah, you're probably gonna cause the world to end in this particular fiction. But what I don't want is to get into that situation where you kind of go, oh, I lost again, save, reload, okay, I'll give it a go, oh, I lost again. I don't want you to feel that, and I recognize this is kind of fighting against the tide a little bit here, because most games do this. I don't necessarily want you to feel that the only objective is to win this thing. I want you to feel that if you lose it, actually there is something there, a narrative payoff to losing, that actually is attractive in terms of what we do. Because, you know, it is a little bit, it sort of encourages a different playing mentality if you continually have to win every scenario. That playing mentality essentially is less narrative driven, it's more competitive driven. So we're kind of trying to think of ways in which we can, you know, which there is kind of exclusive content for losing, you know.
I was just going to say, I think one thing we should mention is that the game will have sort of multiple endings, multiple outcomes, and the player won't necessarily know what actions or inactions will lead to ending.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that you know, that's important, you know, in terms of what's there. And similarly, because you've got this asymmetrical war going on, because you've got 3 different factions doing stuff, if you lose, that can affect their agendas. And that actually may affect their agendas in a positive way. Because the battle that you think will get you this particular objective, if you don't get that objective, maybe that means that objective goes to someone else. And maybe then 3 turns later, right, okay, that helps me in some other way. So you can kind of see the way in which we're sort of thinking about loss in terms of what we do. Cool. Any other questions? Well, thank you all very much, and hope you enjoyed it. If you do want to have a go at the demo, we have left it, as I say, outside the Artemis room. It will occasionally freeze, because it is a demo and is a build that we're working on. If in doubt, come and find Kev or me, and I'm sure we'll be able to reset it for you and set it up so that you can play it again. But thank you for attending. Thank you very much.